Amy, my stepdaughter, recently helped her partner clear out and give away most of the personal effects remaining from her partner's mother, Carol, who had died. They didn't get rid of everything, of course. Carol had been a good hobby painter, and they found places to hang the paintings on the wall. And there were photo albums, too, filled up during Carol's mother-in-law's long life. Those things they kept. They made room for them. But they had many other things to pass on to others who might need them. Clothes, of course, of various sizes, a hospital bed, a rollator, a walking stick, a walker, a small TV, a dresser, and pretty vases and such that they had already had to move from her home into their condo when Carol came home from her last hospital stay. That move meant also selling Carol's house, her car, her washer, her dryer, her refrigerator, you name it. And Amy and Wendy were doing all this transition schlepping while working full-time. So during one of my visits after Carol's death, Amy turned toward me and said, "And don't you leave that much stuff for me to take care of." I get that. I really do. I was one of only several children involved in my parents leaving the two-story house where they had lived for 50 years and raised 5 of us. Leftovers were us. Have you heard of Swedish death cleaning? Author Margareta Magnusson coined the phrase in her 2017 book, The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. Swedish death cleaning is a Scandinavian method of decluttering your home before you die so as to lessen the burden on your grieving loved ones after you're gone. The idea is simple. It makes sense. It means getting rid of everything we can as a gift to those who will have to take care of whatever we leave behind. It sounds like such a good idea, but it's not a simple thing to do. And I couldn't help but be reminded of that by what Jesus says to the disciples in our gospel today after every one of the 5,000 has eaten as much as they wanted, and he had served this to them. There's no doubt that they ate a lot. In the other 3 gospels, it says 5,000 men and women and children. So after Jesus has given them all that bread and fish that they want, he says, "Gather up the fragments left over so that nothing may be lost." He doesn't want to dispose of those things, but to save them so they can be useful for others. Whatever size a basketful may have been, who knows? The 12 baskets full of bread they gathered up sounds like a lot. So what would you do if you went to a church picnic and right after everyone was done eating, somebody came up to you and said, "Okay, well, we have 12 baskets full of bread left over. Who's going to handle this? We don't want any of it to be wasted, so can you take it home?" What would you do? Would you refuse to be bothered with them, or would you maybe take the fragments home and turn them into your famous bread pudding and serve it up with a dash of ice cream at Sunday's lunch at Carm? Or maybe you might take them home and freeze them and stuff them into a Thanksgiving turkey for the Salvation Army. Or maybe just go to the World's Fair Park and feed them to the birds. Just as the extravagant quantity of wine Jesus provides at the wedding where he performed his first miracle, abundance and generosity in this story and in all his stories spell out in all caps Jesus' acts, what they're about, and the crowd notices it. It's abundance, it's generosity. No wonder the crowd wants to take him by force and make him king. And no wonder Jesus needs to escape that flock all spread around him on the grass. If he is ever going to teach them his deepest generosity, his deepest love, he's going to have to make another day for it. He hasn't yet had a chance to teach them about dying and rising, about giving themselves away and losing nothing. Jesus has a habit of feeding all who are hungry for a meaningful life, as well as those who are hungry for bread. And he's willing to receive the leftovers of our lives, in other words, and turn those things into something else. Turn those leftovers into something useful, something beautiful, something life-giving and God-serving. So let's say you have memories from a failed marriage. Maybe Jesus wants to turn those scraps, if you will, into gentle support for a friend who may be struggling now with his or her spouse. Do you have leftover stories that your grandparents told about losing their jobs in the Depression and how they learned to make do? Maybe you need to tell them to your grandchildren. Maybe your aunt can tell you how she prayed for your brother when he was drafted for the Vietnam War, so you can learn how to pour out your heart before God and concern now for your nephew who's getting hooked on drugs. Maybe the family friend who sewed can teach you how she took dresses and shirts and blouses and cut them up into squares and handmade the quilt that she sent off to college with her grandniece. Or maybe your grandmother can borrow back that old churn that's sitting in your hallway and teach your child how she used to churn butter, the same way she showed you when you were 5. Or maybe your dad, who first heard classical music as he studied one floor below the music rehearsal hall, maybe you can get from him a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, because he's played it for you many times, and he'd probably be happy if you could give that recording to someone else and play it for them. Maybe your mother's best friend would be willing to show you how she arranged flowers from her yard for the worship in your church, so your congregation could benefit from that same gift, that leftover from earlier days. Maybe your great uncle can teach you how he shaped chairs in his wood shop. Or maybe he can give you, already made, the chest of drawers that he made for his wife and she once loved. Maybe that woman who volunteers at the Volunteer Ministry Center can tell you what kind of pottery would be best for a new resident moving in straight off the street, so you can make some for them. Maybe you remember how your mom used to stretch the milk bill for her family by mixing powdered milk into whole milk every week so that all her children could have strong bones and teeth. And you could pass on that information to that young mother you know whose budget is already stretched tight. Whatever the leftovers of your life's abundance are, gather them up so that nothing God has given you may be lost. Gather them up so that nothing in your life that's been a gift to you will be wasted. So many times we think of our bounty, all that stuff we have crammed in our closets, and we don't want to get rid of it. On the other hand, we don't want to see it turned into trash. We think of it as a burden. And it could be a burden, that excess, especially if we have always presumed that thriving means buying as much as we can every time we get a paycheck. But maybe, just maybe, we can discover that there are tangible miracles of love and abundance in our leftovers, whatever they are. Maybe we can discover that even our memories are baskets full of holy abundance. Our memories are baskets full of holy abundance that Jesus says, gather it all up. Don't let it go to waste. Most of us are hungry for something, and most of us have quite a few things left over, if you will, as our gospel lesson puts it. Pretty much everybody at some point has an old way of life that they have to trade in for a new one, and then we see how much there is. Even when we know that this changes for the best, we wonder, what happens now? How do I make a life in this new wilderness? And who's going to go with me? And pretty much everybody at some point has met the challenge of making a life out of what someone else left behind. Pretty much everybody has discovered a path through their wilderness by the grace of somebody else. Jesus aims to fill our hungers. He's the one, after all, that distributed that meal of fish and bread till all were fed. And I think Jesus also aims to turn those fragments we can gather up from our lives into something new, into some kind of blessing for somebody else. Creativity and generosity, that's what we're talking about. Creativity and generosity, they'll keep you alive. Whether you are giving generously or receiving generously from someone else, creativity and generosity will keep you both alive, keep you loving. So don't discount any part of your life. Don't discount any part of your life. Value the leftovers of what once fed your hungry heart or body or soul, and offer those leftovers up so that nothing of your life may be lost. This, I think, is how we pass through things temporal without losing things eternal. This is how we meet the prophet Jesus, who is coming into the world, whose glory he offers up to us as grace.